I think why people have trouble, including myself, with charitable giving is that there is an element of ambiguity to it. And I want to explain it. So I was thinking about how do I phrase this because it is a little bit controversial to talk about charitable giving and the sort of challenges with it. And I was thinking about why is it that I personally struggle with it? And I wish I could do more. But and there's a little part of my back of my brain that is always like, I don't know. And I think it's like, okay, when you go and make a purchase, right? When you buy something that is directly related to you, you kind of understand the mechanism of how it's actually getting delivered to you, even though we really don't, right? There's many different steps that happen in the production process to get that particular good or service to you, but we get an end result to it, and it's very clear. We get that reinforced very clear when we make that purchase that, whether it was good or bad for us, we kind of see what that value is almost instantly, right? We buy a car, we know immediately whether we like it or don't. Maybe a car is kind of a bad picture. A carton of eggs, right? When you go and buy a carton of eggs, you know what the price is. You can buy this thing, you get instant feedback within the next day when you make eggs, whether it was a good idea or not. If it was rotten, then it was really good. But but you don't know the whole production process. You kind of know the sort of myth and story behind it that it comes from chickens. But do we really know that? We don't see any of those things. So, but that's not the part that's ambiguous to us. But with charitable giving, you give your money to an organization with the hope that something good is happening with it. And, there's often reported stories, which I think are just often overblown. I think that probably most of the time it's just really bad reporting, to be honest, news reporting. I think most charitable organizations are set up to be beneficial in some way, right? And it's very to get those tax benefits to be a charity, to get the 501, I think it's 501(c) or something like that. I can't remember what the tax designation in the US. Every country has some tax designation, and they have to abide by very strict guidelines that, the country kind of recognizes. These are some of the areas that we want charitable giving to happen. One of them sort of classic is religious organizations, churches, because they do a lot of good, right? Like they make sure that, on one element that people have hope, um, that, that we have some sort of blanket fabric throughout our society and how we should operate, the sort of, to some degree instill somewhat similar values. I know that there's differences, but generally the sort of good natured values that sort of gets distributed. Um, but the problem is when we go to this charitable giving, we get this kind of like ambiguity that happens where we don't know exactly what our money is actually purchasing. We don't we it may be purchasing something that we prefer, or it may be purchasing staplers or something along those lines, or training. And many of us would be like, I don't know, right? I'm not sure if training or staplers is what I was giving my money for. Well, although, this is the thing that's sort of a challenge is that overhead is extraordinarily important, right? We classify that as overhead in charities. It's extraordinarily important to run an organization, right? Most organizations are just overhead. And even like Apple and Google and all these kind of companies that you think about, it's just overhead, right? You need to have an infrastructure and get people to organize and to collaborate together. It's not as easy as one would think. Um, but when it comes to charity, we think that our money should translate instantly to I, I don't even know, right? Like, I don't even, I don't think we have a good sense of what that should be. Is it alleviating the poverty? Is it, um, is it targeting the drug trade, right? Like, I don't know exactly what it is that we're really wanting to accomplish. And that's where it becomes kind of the challenging thing. So many years ago, it turns out to be when I first got in my first job, I had to teach social entrepreneurship, and I had to sort of think about these things for the first 3 or so years of my career. And it was, at the beginning, I was like, I don't want to teach this. But it became one of the more interesting courses because it sort of delved into these complex issues of what it means to have some sort of reinforcement of, or deciding on what goals we're pursuing, trying to understand all these complex topics that are very nuanced. And I don't even know what the right answer with any of these things are, right? I think like that's often the challenge is we don't know, right? And it's not as clear as one would hope. There's not an immediate reinforcement that happens. And um, the challenge then is like getting people to understand that there's this reinforcement that happens, right? Like, and there's this sort of ambiguous reinforcement that happens that when you buy a charity, you give money to a charity, that it just kind of goes off into some some land and we don't really see, right? And there's good charities try to make that clear, but it's very difficult to sort of make that clear, right? You have to tell stories and all those kind of things in terms of what it does. I believe in there's really good charities out there that are wonderful, right? Like the Red Cross. I strongly believe in the Red Cross. I strongly believe in Catholic charities. I think that they do really good work. Um, there is I don't want to get into like naming of them because there's many of them. UNICEF, right? And I think that they do really good work. There is a lot of really good work that gets done, but when we think about them, we don't really know exactly what is happening there. It's not like when you buy a chocolate bar, you get instant reward with that chocolate bar. So the challenging thing is A, we've got this kind of ambiguity that happens, and then B, on the like there's that reinforcement with the consumer or the purchaser that's giving money away. But then, B, the charity itself has to really figure out what they are about. And it's not easy to figure out what it is that you're about, right? You're not really selling anything. So we don't really know what it is that you are doing, right? And that makes it very difficult for everybody. And you have to be somewhat clear in terms of what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes, this is the sort of this is more of the what is called unintended consequences or sort of bigger picture. Um, is we don't know if you do the action, and this is, more for economists to think about or people that are smarter than us, you sort of philosophers, if you do a certain action for good, right? So you give you directly give money to the poor, right? Like somebody that's on the street. Is that helpful or harming the situation? And that is ambiguous in terms of where it's very difficult to know. And sometimes, and many times, I do believe it does help people, but in other times it may not, right? Like it may just make it more challenging to deal with, you know, problems of the sort of foundational reasons why those individuals are actually there in the first place, right? And that this was makes it really, really challenging is that there's all a bunch of complicated issues with all of this. And it doesn't mean like when you go and, when you buy something um, in the store and it's like a purchase of eggs, that doesn't mean that all of these complicated things don't happen there. It's just that it's highlighted much more so when you are giving, just giving, doing something that's just directly where there's not an immediate sort of reward that happens, right? Or something that's concrete, that's tangible that you can see, and then kind of makes it very difficult for us to make sense of. So, there's no right answers with any of this. It's just my challenge that I have figured out, or, that the struggle that I internally have all the time, and whether charity is right for me or not. And there's not a really good answer for that. There's many conundrums that exist like this. This is one of the ones that there's not really good answer um, that is very convincing. And I don't think there ever will be a convincing answer. I think part of these moments of charitable giving is really just about the practice of having a bigger heart, of doing things that are beyond what you can understand. That doesn't mean that you're doing the right thing. When you're doing charitable giving, you might be harming something, but it's about doing things that you don't understand and pursuing them regardless. So I know it's a complicated answer. I know that there's no right or wrong with any of this. And I hope when you listen to when I talk most of the time, there's not a lot of right or wrongs. There's not a lot of straight answers. And even though that we can think and ponder, be curious, I don't know what to think of any of it. All right. Take care. Have a wonderful day.